The dust of late July in Blackwater Hollow, West Virginia, is a fine red powder that settles on everything. It coats the leaves of the wilting corn, gets in your throat, and grinds under your teeth with a quiet grit. It's the kind of place that time seems to have forgotten, a crease in the Appalachian map where the main roads gave up and the hollows took over. The people here are carved from the same hard earth as the hills, their lives a rhythm of quiet struggle and fierce loyalty. But on the afternoon of July 25th, 2012, that quiet was about to be torn open, revealing a silence far more terrifying. 13-year-old Leo Vance was walking home from his summer tutoring session, kicking at loose stones on the dirt path that served as a shortcut from the main county road. The air was thick and heavy, buzzing with the sound of cicadas. He was thinking about the beat-up copy of a Stephen King novel in his backpack, about the cool darkness of his room, when something caught his eye. There, in a patch of low, sun-scorched grass by the roadside, lay a cell phone. It was face down, a black rectangle against the brown earth. He picked it up. An iPhone. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, but the body of it seemed new enough. It was definitely nicer than the cheap flip phone his dad let him use. He tried the power button. Nothing. The battery was dead. A flicker of finders keepers excitement ran through him. He shoved it in his pocket and quickened his pace, the promise of this small treasure making him forget the oppressive heat. His father, Bill Vance, was in the garage, trying to coax life back into a lawnmower that had seen better decades. He was a tall, stooped man with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands. He looked at the phone Leo presented to him with a skeptical eye. "Probably belongs to one of the kids from up the ridge," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "But let's see." He found an old charger that fit, and after a few minutes the screen flickered to life. A picture of a smiling young woman, her face framed by dark hair, appeared for a second before being replaced by a lock screen demanding a passcode. "Well, that's that," Bill said. But then he had an idea. With the deftness of a man used to fixing things, he popped the back off and slid out the small SIM card. He put it into his own beat-up Android, a modern-day transplant of a mechanical heart. The phone chimed as it registered the new card. He opened the contacts. The list was full of names he didn't recognize. Mom, Dad, Liv, and a dozen others. He scrolled through, his thumb hovering over the screen. He decided to just pick one at random, a number listed only as Cody. He pressed call. A young man's voice answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "Yeah, hi," Bill said. "My name's Bill Vance. My son found a phone on the side of the road out here in Blackwater Hollow. This number was in it, just trying to get it back to whoever owns it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "Wait, where did you say you are? Blackwater Hollow?" The voice was sharp with sudden concern. "This is Cody. That's my cousin Megan's phone. What would it be doing out there? She lives in Ridgegate." Ridgegate was the next town over, a good 10 miles of winding, hilly roads away. Cody's voice was tight with an anxiety that immediately transferred itself through the phone to Bill Vance. He explained where Leo had found it on the dusty path near the old cornfield. Cody thanked him, his voice strained, and said he needed to make a call. When Bill hung up, the broken lawnmower in his garage suddenly seemed like a trivial problem. An unease had settled in the hot, still air. Cody's call went to his uncle, Carl Calloway. Carl was a man whose life had been a series of hard knocks. A former coal miner, his lungs were shot, and he now ran a small, struggling hardware store in Ridgegate. Megan was his only child, the light of his life since his wife had passed away from cancer 5 years earlier. When Cody called, Carl wasn't immediately alarmed. "She didn't come home last night," he told his nephew, his voice raspy from a lifetime of coal dust and cigarettes. "But she texted me, said she was staying over at her friend Liv's place in the Hollow, said she'd just go straight to work from there this morning. You know how she is, 24 years old, thinks she's too grown up to check in all the time." But Cody's news about the phone changed everything. It made no sense. Why would she leave her phone on the side of a road and then text her father? The story didn't add up. The seed of worry Cody had planted began to sprout into a thorny vine of fear in Carl's chest. That fear blossomed into full-blown panic later that evening. A car pulled into Carl's driveway. It was a girl named Jessica, one of Megan's co-workers from the small garment factory in town where Megan did seamstress work. Jessica's face was pale. "Mr. Calloway," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Is Megan sick? She didn't come into work today. She didn't call. We were all so worried." The floor seemed to drop out from under Carl's feet. The text message had been a lie. She wasn't at work. She hadn't been at Liv's. Where was his daughter? He drove to Blackwater Hollow himself, his old pickup truck kicking up a cloud of red dust. He found Liv Newman's house, a small, neat rambler set back from the road. Liv, a pretty girl with wide, frightened eyes, confirmed part of the story. Megan had come over after work. They'd had dinner with Liv's family. She had a small overnight bag with her, a change of clothes for work the next day. She was planning to stay. "But then she just left," Liv said, wringing her hands. "It was weird. I was in the bathroom, and when I came out, she was grabbing her bag. She said something came up, something urgent. She was out the door before I could even ask what was wrong. I heard her motorcycle start up, and she was gone." It was about 9:30. Megan commuted on an old Honda Rebel, a bike that had once been her father's. The 7-mile ride between Ridgegate and Blackwater Hollow was one she knew like the back of her hand. Carl couldn't imagine her just running away. She was a good kid, responsible. She wouldn't do that to him. The family and friends organized a search. They drove the roads between the two towns, calling her name, their voices swallowed by the vast, indifferent darkness of the woods. They found nothing. No sign of her. No sign of the motorcycle. By midnight, trembling and hollow with dread, Carl Calloway walked into the county sheriff's office and reported his daughter missing. Sheriff Brody was a man who had seen the dark underbelly of these quiet hills more times than he cared to remember. He listened to Carl's story, his face a grim, unreadable mask. A missing 24-year-old woman was always cause for alarm. He dispatched a deputy to pick up the phone from the Vances and sent another car to meet Leo and have him show them exactly where he found it. The location was a desolate stretch of dirt road, flanked on one side by a dense, rustling cornfield and on the other by thick woods. The nearest house was a good 200 yards away. Brody and his deputies swept the area with flashlights, their beams cutting sharp, nervous patterns in the dark. They walked the rows of the cornfield. They found nothing. No scuff marks, no dropped belongings, no signs of a struggle. It was as if she and her motorcycle had simply been erased from the face of the earth. The investigation hit a wall almost immediately. Blackwater Hollow was a technological black hole. The sparse population was made up mostly of farmers and retirees. There were no surveillance cameras on the roads, no ring doorbells on the houses. The only eyes on that road belonged to the owls in the trees. It was a perfect place to make someone disappear. The detectives on Brody's small force turned their attention to the phone. They managed to bypass the lock screen. The message folder was empty, wiped clean, but the call log told a story. At 9:26 p.m. on the night she vanished, Megan had made a call to a number ending in 326. It was a short call, less than a minute. Then, between 10:15 and 10:45 p.m., that same number had called her back 11 times. All of them were missed calls. That number had also called her earlier in the day, and she had called it back for a 7-minute conversation. It was clearly a frequent contact, yet the number wasn't saved in her phone. It was a ghost number. Then they looked at the photos. Most were typical for a young woman. Selfies with Liv, pictures of her cat, a photo of her and her father smiling awkwardly at a county fair. But then there were others, photos of her with an older man, much older. In some, they were just sitting together at a diner. In others, they were more intimate. One showed his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. Another showed them kissing, a clandestine shot that seemed to have been taken by Megan herself, holding the phone out at arm's length. Her father didn't recognize him. He swore Megan had never mentioned a boyfriend. She was his whole world. He would have known, wouldn't he? The mystery man became the focus. Sheriff Brody had a deputy call the ghost number, the one ending in 326. Someone answered, breathed heavily for a second, then hung up. Subsequent calls went straight to voicemail. The number was a burner, a prepaid track phone, unregistered, untraceable. They took the man's photo to Megan's workplace. Her co-workers confirmed their suspicions. Megan was definitely in a relationship, but she was intensely private about it. A man would often pick her up for lunch, but she always made him wait down the street away from the entrance. He always wore a full-face motorcycle helmet, even in the sweltering heat. He was a shadow. Her friend Liv, her face streaked with tears, admitted she had suspected something too. Megan had been asking her for advice lately. What kind of shirts did guys like? What was a good gift for a man's birthday? She was acting like a girl in the first flush of a new romance, but she was hiding it from everyone. The break came from an unexpected place. A small craft store next to the garment factory had a single grainy security camera pointed at the street. The detectives spent hours poring over the footage from the weeks before Megan's disappearance. And then they found him. A man on a large Harley, pulling up down the block. Megan walks out to meet him. He's wearing a helmet, but he lifts the visor. The camera is too far away to get a clear shot of his face, but it captures a moment of intimacy. He reaches out and gently touches her cheek. He helps her put on her own helmet. Then they ride away together. The camera caught something else too, a clear shot of his license plate. The motorcycle was registered to a man named Dale Miller, 39 years old, from a town called Lanton, about 30 miles away. He was married, and he owned a used motorcycle dealership. Two of Brody's best detectives drove out to Lanton. They found Dale Miller at his dealership, a sprawling lot of gleaming chrome under the hot sun. He was a handsome man, tan and fit, with the easy confidence of a successful salesman. When they showed him Megan Calloway's picture, he didn't flinch. "Never seen her before in my life," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He denied owning a burner phone. He denied knowing anything. The detectives didn't push. They just laid a photograph on the counter, a still frame from the craft store's security camera, the picture of him touching Megan's face. Dale Miller's composure shattered. He slumped against the counter, his face pale. He admitted it, the affair. He said he had to hide it. His wife, he said, was a fierce woman, a jealous woman. A divorce would ruin him. He told them he met Megan at a diner near her work a few months back. Some guy was harassing her and he stepped in. He was the hero. They started talking. One thing led to another. He bought the burner phone to keep their communication secret. She was the one who insisted on the secrecy, he said. She was afraid of what her father would think, him being so much older and married. He had an alibi for the night she disappeared, a solid one. His wife and kids were out of town, visiting her parents. It was a rare opportunity for him and Megan to spend a whole night together. He called her on the burner phone, the 326 number, and told her to meet him. Their usual spot was a cheap, discreet motel on the highway, the Starlight Inn. He said he waited for her there, and waited. She never showed up. He called her over and over, his frustration growing. Finally, around 11, he gave up and went home. It sounded too convenient, too neat. But the motel had cameras. The footage from the Starlight Inn's lobby confirmed his story down to the minute. It showed Dale Miller checking in, pacing anxiously in the parking lot, checking his phone, and finally leaving, alone and dejected after more than an hour. Dale Miller, the secret lover, the prime suspect, was innocent. Sheriff Brody felt the investigation sliding backward. They were back at square one. But worse, the most promising lead had evaporated. All they had was a missing girl, a dropped phone, and 100 square miles of silent, watchful wilderness. The only plausible theory now was that something had happened to Megan on that lonely stretch of dirt road. Maybe she'd dropped her phone and gotten off her bike to look for it. Maybe she'd encountered someone random, but there was no evidence of a struggle, no blood, no motorcycle. It was a perfect, seamless, vanishing act. News travels fast in small towns, and whispers travel even faster. The story of Megan Calloway's disappearance spread through the hollows like a fever. With the police having no answers, the residents began to invent their own. Maybe she had enemies. Maybe she was in debt. Maybe it was a random robber who took her bike and killed her for it. Or maybe, and this was the fear that took root the deepest, it was something worse. A pervert. A predator who had been watching, waiting for a lone woman on a dark road. The anxiety was a palpable thing. It hung in the air with the red dust. Young women who used to think nothing of walking home from a friend's house after dark now insisted on being driven. Doors that were never locked were now bolted shut. Every rustle in the woods, every strange car on the road became a source of suspicion and fear. Blackwater Hollow had become a place where everyone was looking over their shoulder. The community was holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. They had no idea it would land with the force of an earthquake. 4 days after Megan Calloway vanished, the other shoe dropped. The call came into the sheriff's office from a man named Edgar Rowe, an old-timer who lived on the edge of Thuong Bin village. Mr. Rowe was the unofficial caretaker of the local cemetery, a quiet, sun-dappled plot of land on a hill overlooking the hollow. He went there every morning to pull weeds and tend to the graves of his wife and ancestors. "Sheriff," his reedy voice crackled over the phone, "you need to get up here. Something's not right." Brody drove up himself. The cemetery was peaceful, the old headstones leaning at odd angles like crooked teeth. Mr. Rowe was waiting for him by the gate, his face a mask of grim concern. He led Brody to the far corner of the cemetery near the woods. He pointed with a trembling finger. "There," he said. It was a grave, or rather, the suggestion of one. A rectangular mound of freshly turned earth about the size of a human body. But it was all wrong. There was no headstone, not even a simple wooden cross. In this part of the country, that was unheard of. The local custom was to place a ring of heavy stones around a new grave to keep the soil from eroding and to keep scavenging animals out. This grave had none. The dirt was just piled loosely, as if someone had dug a hole and filled it in with frantic haste. And there was something else. A faint, sickly, sweet smell clinging to the air. The smell of decay. "Ain't been no funerals here in 6 months, Mr. Rowe said, his voice low, "and nobody's moved a grave. I'd know. This was dug in the night, dug by someone who didn't want to be seen." Sheriff Brody knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone what was in that shallow grave. It wasn't a dead animal. The smell was wrong. It was the smell of human decomposition, a smell he had encountered too many times in his long career. This wasn't a burial, it was a dumping. An attempt to hide a crime. He called in the county coroner and a forensics team. They sectioned off the area with yellow tape, the bright plastic a jarring slash of color against the serene green of the cemetery. As a courtesy to the old ways, Brody waited until the local preacher arrived to say a few words over the site before they began to dig. The forensics team worked slowly, carefully, scraping away the loose red earth. They didn't have to dig far. Less than 2 feet down, they found her. A human body. Female. She was naked, her limbs twisted at unnatural angles. She hadn't been buried in a coffin, or even a shroud. She had been thrown into the hole like a bag of trash. Her body was in a state of advanced decomposition, bloated and discolored by the heat. The coroner, a grim-faced woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, did a preliminary examination right there at the graveside. The scene was a catalogue of horrors. The victim's body was a canvas of bruises and shallow scratches. Her tongue was bitten through, her pubic hair had been crudely shaved off, and the area was swollen and bruised. There were severe injuries to her chest, as if she had been stomped on. Her buttocks were covered in dark, patterned marks, like she'd been beaten with a belt or a board. There were small circular burns on the backs of her hands, the kind made by a lit cigarette. A large amount of semen was found in her vagina. Dr. Sharma couldn't find a clear single cause of death. No gunshot wound, no stab wounds, no obvious signs of strangulation. Her conclusion was chilling. "Based on the evidence," she told Sheriff Brody, her voice tight with controlled fury, "my preliminary assessment is that this woman was held captive. She was brutally and repeatedly tortured and sexually assaulted over a prolonged period. She likely died from a combination of her injuries, shock, and sheer physical exhaustion. The forensic analysis of the body's state of decomposition gave them a rough time of death. She had died approximately 1 day prior. This was not Megan Calloway. Megan had been missing for 4 days. This was someone else, a second victim. The monster of Blackwater Hollow had claimed another life. The question of her identity was answered quickly. Sheriff Brody had his deputies go door to door in the immediate area, a grim task. They showed a morgue photo, digitally cleaned up as best they could, to the residents. In a small cabin about 2 miles from the cemetery, a neighbor recognized her. Her name was Laura Vick. She was 24 years old. She lived alone. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was a teenager, and she had no other family in the area. She was quiet, kept to herself. She had a low-level education and no real job skills, so she made a modest living from home, weaving intricate baskets and selling them at a local craft market. She was, in every sense of the word, a ghost, the perfect victim. Her isolated life meant that her absence had gone completely unnoticed for at least a day. Brody and his team went to her small cabin. It was neat and tidy. There were no signs of a break-in, no signs of a struggle. The attack, they reasoned, must have happened somewhere else. The killer was likely a sex offender who knew Laura, knew she was alone, knew she was vulnerable, knew that no one would come looking for her right away. They canvassed Laura's neighbors again. A woman named Miss Gable, who lived down the road, provided a crucial piece of information. She had seen Laura on the night of July 26th, 2 nights before her body was found. It had been a hot, sticky night, and Laura had gone for a walk to get some air. She was heading down the dirt path, Miss Gable said, around 9:30. I told her to be careful, walking alone at night with that other girl missing and all. But Laura, she just smiled, said she grew up in these woods, wasn't afraid of anything. She had been walking on the same dirt path where Megan Calloway's phone had been found. The 2 cases slammed together in Sheriff Brody's mind. 2 young women, both 24, both from the same small, isolated community, both targeted at night, and the location where Megan's phone was found was only about 500 yards from Laura Vick's cabin. This wasn't a random attacker drifting through. This wasn't a killer from another town. The monster was local. He was one of them. He lived right here in Blackwater Hollow. The investigation, which had been sprawling and directionless, now narrowed its focus with laser-like intensity. Brody ordered a full background check on every single resident of Blackwater Hollow. He wanted to know about every man with a criminal record, every domestic dispute, every whisper of strange behavior. His deputies began a systematic house-to-house canvass, paying special attention to any single men living in the area. That canvass led them to a rundown farmhouse on the edge of the hollow, not more than 100 yards from Laura Vick's cabin. It belonged to a man named Lester Moody, 43 years old. His wife had left him 6 years ago. He lived alone. He did some subsistence farming, took odd jobs when he could get them. He was strong, healthy, and quiet. Too quiet. A neighbor, a man named Hank, who sometimes shared a beer with Lester, provided the detail that turned suspicion into cold certainty. Hank told the deputies about something he'd seen a few months back. He'd been over at Lester's place, and after a few too many beers, he'd needed to use the bathroom. He stumbled down the hall and opened the wrong door. It was a storage room, one Lester always kept locked. What Hank saw inside had shaken him. It was like some kind of weird shrine, Hank stammered, clearly unnerved by the memory. The walls were covered with pictures of women in bikinis cut out from magazines, big ones, and there was women's underwear, dozens of pairs, panties, bras, all kinds, just hanging there. It was creepy, like something out of a horror movie. He called it his Wonderland once, when he was drunk. I thought he was just a lonely, strange dude. I never thought. Hank's voice trailed off. Sheriff Brody felt the familiar cold thrill of the hunt. This was him. This had to be him. He got a warrant. He assembled a team, not just his deputies, but a couple of state troopers for backup. They descended on Lester Moody's farmhouse in the grey light of dawn. Lester wasn't home. The house was quiet. In the back, they found an old, abandoned pigsty. The door was held shut with a new, heavy-duty padlock. They cut it open. Inside, covered by 2 thick sheets of plywood, was a motorcycle. A red Honda Rebel. Carl Calloway was called to the scene. His face crumpled as he identified it. It was Megan's. Brody and his team moved on the house. It was a simple 5-room farmhouse, dusty and cluttered. But one door, the door to the storage room Hank had described, was locked with a deadbolt. Brody didn't hesitate. "Take it down," he ordered. A trooper slammed a battering ram into the door. The wood splintered. On the second hit, the frame gave way and the door flew open. The stench that rolled out of the room was a foul mix of sweat, cheap perfume, and fear. The scene inside was a nightmare made real. The walls were covered with pornographic magazines and large, glossy photos of swimsuit models, just as Hank had described. And hanging from hooks, like grotesque Christmas ornaments, were dozens and dozens of pieces of women's underwear. In the center of the room, there was a dirty mattress on the floor, and on that mattress, a figure was lying. It was a woman. She was naked, her mouth covered with a wide strip of duct tape. Her body was a road map of bruises and welts. She was rail-thin, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have burned out everything else. But she was alive. It was Megan Calloway. In the corner of the room, they found her handbag. Inside were her wallet and her identification, and scattered on the floor around the mattress were empty food wrappers, water bottles, and several dark, dried bloodstains. Lester Moody's Wonderland was a torture chamber. Megan was weak, dehydrated, and in shock, but she was a survivor. After being rushed to the hospital, she found the strength to tell the police her story. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, but her words painted a picture of pure evil. On the night she disappeared, she had been on her way to meet Dale Miller. As she was driving down the dark dirt road, she saw a man lying on the ground. It was Lester Moody. She knew him vaguely as a neighbor. He was moaning, clutching his leg. He looked like he'd fallen and hurt himself. She stopped her bike to help. The moment she got off the bike, his injury vanished. He sprang to his feet. In his hand was a folding knife, the blade glinting in her headlight. He held it to her throat and forced her into his house, into the locked storage room. He called it his fairyland. He made her strip. When she screamed, he taped her mouth shut. For the next day, he kept her there. He tortured her. He sexually assaulted her twice a day. He gave her just enough food and water to keep her alive. On the evening of July 26th, he brought someone else into the room. It was Laura Vick. He had used the same trick, feigning an injury to lure her into his house. Megan watched in horror as he subjected Laura to the same brutal treatment. He assaulted her, even though she was on her menstrual period. He slapped her, whipped her with a belt, kicked her. When Laura, weakened and terrified, couldn't perform the acts he demanded, he flew into a rage. He choked her. Laura, who Megan later learned had a pre-existing heart condition, went limp. She lay motionless on the floor. Lester, showing no emotion, dragged her body out of the room. Megan remained his prisoner, certain she would be next, until the police broke down the door. A massive manhunt was launched for Lester Moody. They found him 2 days later, hiding deep in the mountains, trying to survive on wild berries and stream water. He didn't resist arrest. He seemed tired, defeated. Back in the interrogation room, he confessed to everything. His story was a pathetic and horrifying tale of loneliness and perversion. He said that on the night of the 24th he had been drinking. He had genuinely slipped and fallen on the road, but he wasn't so drunk that he didn't see Megan approaching on her motorcycle. In that moment, something inside him snapped. He said years of sexual deprivation had twisted him. His wife had left him because of his violent sexual demands. She told him he was a monster, that she would lie there like a log because she was too afraid to move. After she left, he was too afraid of catching a disease to visit sex workers, so he started collecting things. The underwear, stolen from clotheslines, the magazines. He built his fairyland as a private sanctuary for his sick fantasies. When he saw Megan, a pretty young woman, alone on a dark road, his fantasy and reality collided. The urge to rape her, he said, was overwhelming. He admitted that when he was trying to grab her, he had accidentally knocked her phone out of her hand, sending it flying into the grass. He hadn't even realized it at the time. He tricked Laura Vick into his house using the same ruse. He brutalized her without a second thought for her physical condition. When she died, he said her heart just gave out. He wrapped her body in a tarp, put it in a wheelbarrow, and took it to the cemetery in the dead of night, burying her in a shallow grave. Lester Moody's trial was a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony from Megan Calloway was harrowing and unshakable. The courtroom was packed every day with residents from Blackwater Hollow and Ridgegate, their faces a mixture of grief and pure rage. They shouted curses at him as he was led in and out of the courtroom. Several times, people tried to break through the line of deputies to attack him. The public demand for justice was a roar that could not be ignored. The judge sentenced Lester Moody to death for his inhumane and unimaginable crimes. The evil that had been lurking in the shadows of Blackwater Hollow had been dragged into the light, but for the people of that quiet community the scars would remain. The memory of the fairyland and the two young women who had been trapped there would haunt the hollows for generations, a brutal reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who live right next door, smiling at you from across a fence, hiding a world of unimaginable horror behind a locked door.